All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, YouTube. This is Rosh, and this is a video series called AxeFX Basics. This is episode 12. I kind of lost count. But either way, this is an AxeFX series of some video tutorials on some of the basics on building presets. A little about me. My name is Rosh, once again, and I am an LA-based guitar tech and guitar player. Some of my clients include Steve Vai, Leppard, Dweezil Zappa, Melissa Etheridge. I build a lot of guitar rigs for a lot of people. I wanted to give back to the Fractal community and show some of my approaches on how I build presets. And so I had a question in one of the YouTube comments from a previous video asking about how the compressor works and how to use it how to use it with a distorted rock guitar. So yeah, I definitely want to answer any questions that any of you guys have. So if you do have any questions, feel free to leave a comment underneath any one of the videos of some topics you'd like me to cover. I would be more than happy to. So in this preset right here, I built a basic preset and it has a clean and a dirty sound. So scene 1 is a clean sound. Ooh, my guitar's not even remotely in tune. Got to have an in-tune guitar when you are recording video. Okay, so this is a clean sound, and we're using the deluxe reverb. And we're using basically the deluxe reverb cab, 57 and a 121. And then in scene 2, we have a dirty sound. I'm using Plexi Marshall with British 70s greenback. So here's some of the settings. Okay, so real two basic sounds, a clean and a dirty sound. So let's talk about what a compressor actually does. So I'm going to bring this compressor in. We're going to use the studio compressor because it's easy to visualize what's going on with a compressor. So here are the standard settings. There's a couple different ways people use compressors. Some of them use compressors to kind of smooth out things. That's the most common way, to make sure that the transients, basically the quiet parts and the loud parts of a guitar part, are the same volume. So for example, if I pick really lightly, and then I also play dig in, those have two completely different volumes. What a compressor does is it kind of brings those volumes a little bit closer together. So you can hear I'm really striking the guitar, I'm really strumming hard. And it's pretty close to the same volume as the picked arpeggios. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what a compressor does. That's the main thing of why they were invented. So what they do is technically compress the sound so that they're the same volume. The quieter parts without the compressor. And then the loud parts, they're all the same volume. So in the studio compressor, it's easy to just visualize everything. So I'll just start here. So one of the first things you want to do is, if you're using this block, use the auto makeup so that the volume between the compressor on and off you don't get a drop in volume for any reason. So here's with it off, and here's with it on. So they're generally the same volume. Of course, the compressor also changes the tone of the guitar, so that's one thing you want to keep in mind. So, and we can talk about that in a little bit, but mainly what you want to think of whenever you're dealing with a compressor is the threshold and the ratio. The ratio is how much compression there is. Basically, right now it's 2, so it's a 2-to-1 ratio. So as it reaches what is called the threshold, the compressor pushes down the volume in a 2-to-1 ratio, and it also brings up the volume in a 2-to-1 ratio, depending on where the threshold's set. So as I move this threshold, you'll see where where the compressor kicks on. So the lower the lower this knob is, the quicker the compressor will kick on. Like as in how loud you play will start kicking on the compressor. But if I have let's say the threshold pretty high, then there's still a little bit more headroom that I have before the compressor kicks in, and you can kind of see that curve right around here. And the other thing is that the ratio is also how much it pushes it down. So as you see, the more I crank it, as you approach the threshold, you won't get any louder past this, depending on this ratio. So, for example, if I put the threshold here, negative 43.5, as the guitar approaches here, this is where the threshold is. It's not going to get much louder than that because the ratio is so high. So, for example, as you can hear, it will not go any louder because the ratio is that high. If anything, it's getting quieter, right? Because what's happening is this ratio knob basically is saying, okay, as you approach this threshold, we're going to keep pushing down the guitar signal. And then the harder you push against this threshold, the more it's going to compress. Okay, so that's kind of like the layman's term. We can talk about technical terms, but since this is a video about basics of what a compressor is, what you want to do is basically, if you're going to use a compressor, it's mainly to smooth out parts between picked arpeggios or something like that. So you see it maintained consistent volume of that. If I played that without the compressor, it would be all over the place. And of course you hear that tonal change, but this is kind of one of the things of why sometimes when you hear certain songs, they can do something. So one of the most popular songs that you can hear a ton of compression on is actually Under the Bridge by the Red Hot Chili Peppers. So what's going on is he's using a ton of compression and the threshold's really low, so that when he's playing these Hendrix rhythm guitar parts, they're all going to be the same volume even if he's strumming the guitar. So all those little hammer on and pull off things in the guitar part itself is they're a lot easier to hear, and it's actually easier to play too. If I played it without the compressor. So you see that the volume is inconsistent, and we're probably just going to bring this compressor up here in the level just a bit. So that's one of the main uses for a compressor when you use a clean sound. There's a bunch of others that I probably don't have time to cover in this video, but one of the other ways, and especially with let's say a distorted guitar sound, is actually the other two main things that people use compressors for is one, boosting the input, almost treating it like a clean boost. So for example, let's reset this channel. And then let's actually use a pedal compressor. So what they're doing, for example, guitar players like Andy Timmons and Eric Johnson, what they do is they use a compressor to actually boost the input of a clean amp. And since it changes the tone, so this is like a deluxe reverb, so it's starting to break up a little bit because I'm using the bridge pickup. But what they're actually going to do is use it as a clean boost. So they actually turn the compressor on, and then they actually turn the level up. So you hear that because of the tonal change, it's almost like using a boost pedal in an amp. So there's a really great YouTube video of Andy Timmons going over his compressor settings, and he turns the compressor on and off, and you can hear that there's a huge drop in volume when he plays the amp. I mean, it's that drastic, and you can see the level's almost 12 dB. So again, it's almost like a clean boost. It's almost the same as if you use a drive pedal. But one of the things is the compressor also changes the tone of the guitar. It smooths it out a little bit. And it makes your notes a little bit more consistent because they're always getting, the input of the amp is getting more consistent volume. So I'm not really a country player, but a lot of country guys also use the compressor to kind of boost the input of their amp, as well as letting some of their, bends and stuff sustain. Okay, so that's a second use of a compressor. Now, the third, and this is the main question that I had in the comments, was how do you use a compressor with a distorted amp? So another Red Hot Chili Peppers song that's really great use of a compressor is called, I think it's called Emmett Remus, which is basically Summertime Backwards. I think it's that song. I could be wrong. But what he's doing is using the compressor as a way to sustain a note. And the reason why this happens is you can even visually see it. If I turn the ratio to infinite, what happens is as the guitar approaches this threshold, which is determined by this knob, anything after that is going to be the same volume. Now, if you are playing a note and it's going to be the same consistent volume over this long release time, then it actually translates into sustain on the guitar. So for example, if I play just like a bend into this amp, okay, so, the note sustains a little bit, but if you actually use the compressor, and again, I'm using infinite ratio with a low threshold, not boosting the input of the amp. Let's just do auto makeup. What's going to happen is that it approaches the threshold and it just stays here, and you get this awesome, cool, like sustain. So you hear that, and I'm running completely direct into Logic right now, so I don't even have an amp on or anything like that. And you get this cool sustain. So that track, what he's doing is, if you hear the guitar part, he's actually just holding these bends that kind of like seem to ring out forever. And the compressor combined with a little bit of natural feedback from the guitar allows the note to sustain a lot. So if you put the threshold all the way down and you use the compressor, you get kind of like infinite bends, basically. Right? And then, again, you need a little bit of volume to kind of like get the note to sustain. But that's one way to use the compressor. A lot of guys also talk about using a compressor when you're playing high gain stuff to do palm muting, but that's actually more of like a multi-band compressor, which we can also talk about in a future video. So in general, if you're going to use a compressor in front of a dirty amp, it's generally for the sustain and maybe the tone change. Right? Because you're getting rid of all the dynamics using the compressor. So, and again, you can also boost the level, and it'll be kind of like a, almost like a clean boost. And the other thing that'll help determine that is if you actually increase the release time, that means the compressor is going to release even slower. So, and again, if there was a little bit of volume, it would probably sustain more. Here's the same bend without the compressor. See, it just kind of dies off after a while. So let's put 1,000 milliseconds, which is 1 second release time. So yeah, you have a lot of different options when you're using a compressor with a dirty amp. Now, that's kind of more of an effect as opposed to like actual compression. So again, if you're going for like infinite sustain on a bend or something like that, Combined with some natural feedback, you can use a compressor like that. Some of the other pedal compressors are probably a little bit better for this, so we'll do that. Let's increase the release time, and then let's see what happens. Ugh, that's not good. All right. Yeah, so the pedal compressor is not really cutting it for that, but you kind of get the idea. So that's kind of like a crash course in a compressor. I don't really use it for the sustain thing, but I have on for high gain stuff, I do use the multi-band compressor, which I would be more than happy to do for a future video. But that's a little bit different. What that is to kind of pull back the transients on like low palm muted stuff. So if you're playing a lot of like gent, they use multi-band compressors to kind of tame the low end, so that when you palm mute a note, you don't get that low frequency chug, and that conflicts, and you get this kind of weird boomy bass thing. So, all right. So as requested here that is a kind of crash course on the compressor. I would definitely experiment with it, especially when you're using it with a distorted amp, and also you can use the compressor again to smooth out some of the things that you're doing with a dirty amp anyways, just like you would in a clean amp. So if you're playing like kind of an arpeggio part, let's try this. It's gonna be different if So you can hear just standard, compression settings. You can hear that it just smooths out a little bit of the guitar signal, especially if you're doing, picked arpeggio stuff, or if you're doing some kind of like clean bends. Or if you are a country player, and I'm terrible at this, but I'll attempt it. And if you do the Travis picking thing, it just kind of smooths out all that other stuff. As opposed to this. So, yeah, definitely not a country player, but a lot of the country guys use the compressor just to kind of smooth out some of that Travis picking stuff too. Okay, so that's plenty of stuff for compressor. That's a good crash course in the compressor. So if you have any more topics you'd like me to cover, by all means, leave some comments and below. And I'll see you guys next time. Thanks.